just like the ones that are in India or in China or in any other part of the world. But lately I've gotten a little more interested in ceremonial meanings, and I think it's arisen because as I began to study all these cosmologies, Shiva and Shakti, or in the Kabbalah, it's the limitless light, and how the light and the energy and the consciousness begins to whirl around and come to a point and blossom forth into all of these creative manifestations. In the Vedic literature, there's this kind of stepping down process that involves ultimately the severance of Maya, so that Maya is what kind of injects itself in the consciousness and really makes us think that we're separate, and also allows for us to get caught up in the enchantment of the manifold expressions of relative reality. So as I've been studying all of this, I began to acknowledge that each person, of course, was a point of light, a divine spark. And each person had some sort of a kala or digit or functional divine blueprint in themselves. I began to also think about what the Native Americans were doing with their elemental invocations, because truly when you go to particularly like the Hopi dances, but some of the Pueblo dances around here, you literally see them call the clouds from the mountaintops. And during the day, you'll notice the clouds gather over the mountaintop, these big, bilious, cumulus clouds. And then during the day, during the whole ceremony that they're doing all day long dancing, great sacrifice they make, really, in doing all this, all day long. And then the clouds begin to hover and come over the village. And in New Mexico, we can't take any rain for granted. So when I first moved here from Texas, I was a little shocked. I thought I was going to die of thirst or something because it's so dry. But what happens is you begin to get a sense of your dependence, your utter dependence on the beneficence of the universe. And then you can appreciate what the Indians are doing when they call forth the rain from the heavens, and they call forth the life force coming up from the sprouts into the plants. And they're acknowledging that the human being has a responsibility, really, through spiritual and ceremonial life, to participate and revere the creation, and also to do the human part of that. So when Sean was saying that we're here to be blessings to the world, we have this responsibility to be blessings to each other, but also to nature and the universe at large. And so the Native Americans acknowledged that the human being is in this mysterious place between heaven and earth, and an agent of invocation, and can bring forth these natural forces into a communion and a blessing with all of life, and that each person, when you do any kind of a ceremonial act, which is really all of life, can do it in the right spirit or miss the boat and do it in the wrong spirit. And nowadays, the modern world, we get off the mark so quickly, because the world that we live in is not at all, other than lip service, it's not at all interested in your sincere participation. So, we have this problem with self-esteem and self-value, and everybody's going around trying to be somebody. And that really interferes with the divine human role of our participation in life. And so that's why some of the Vedic literature is so gorgeous and so important, because every act is an act of sacrifice and an act of acknowledgement that Brahman is the food, and Brahman is the fire, the digestive fire. And Brahman is he who eats the food, and the one who digests, and the one who moves and acts. So ultimately, this message from the Native Americans about our responsibility in life and how we can participate in life with reverence, and each act becomes a sacred ritual, is the great gift of the Native Americans, and all ancient traditions, really. All of the ancient wisdom traditions had an acknowledgement that each human being has a responsibility to keep their body as a sacred space, and keep their home as a sacred space, and keep their work as a sacred space. And then over and beyond that, there are priests and givers of the wisdom of invocation. And so, of course, in the Native American tradition, they pass along these beautiful prayers, these beautiful prayers. And one of my favorite Tewa prayers is from the mountains and from the hills and from the earth and from the trees, may your authority return to you. Which seems to me to be a real acknowledgement of each person's divinity. But then the Tewa go on to say that each person has a responsibility for their own psychic and psychological growth to become a fully, as Sham says, fully born human being who is able to participate in their culture and make their life sacred so as to benefit each other. So one of the Native American prayers when they kill a deer, and many of you have heard of The Man Who Killed the Deer, the Frank Waters book, it's so lovely. One of the Native American prayers is, we know your life is as precious as ours, and that one life sometimes has to give to another so that the one life of all may continue unbroken. So all of the great avatars came into the world and, as Sham said, spilled their blood for us and demonstrated this sacrificial life so that our life will continue and the life of the cosmos will continue. And so, the right attitude towards ceremony and sacrifice and sacred culture and sacred space in oneself is essential to how we conduct our life. And the Kabbalists talk about this word tikkun, and so the idea is acknowledging that there are these divine sparks and that each person has a responsibility to restore and redeem the intrinsic, pristine, essential nature of that spark in their expression on the earth. And they go on to say that the earth is the one dimension of reality, of relative reality, the earth, where the divine and the, what you could call evil, commingle. And in this mishmash of earth, where all these divine sparks are hidden and trapped and needing restoration, is also this commingling of what we call evil. Now the Kabbalists say that evil is the farthest direction away from God. So even though the pure consciousness and energy is absolute and inhabiting, indwelling in every aspect of reality, including the evil, even though that is true and that is forever untouched, on the earth, we have something to do with bringing forth the divine spark and allowing it to grow, flourish, blossom, and express so as to give blessing to each other and to all of life. And the Indians extend it beyond the human community to their kinship with animals and plants and inanimate objects even. And you see that in the Kabbalists too, that they say that there's a divine spark in my glass. And so my duty is to keep my glass in the condition so that its intrinsic, essential being will shine forth and express itself. And our duty to each other is to foster and encourage that intrinsic essential nature in each other. And unfortunately, the way the social world works, we so often don't do that. And so often we can, verbalize all these words about how we're compassionate and loving and whatever we are to each other, but are we really? And then to top that difficulty is the problem of, you have a great teacher sometimes, and you can get confused by that teacher because they seem to, not be sort of nice all the time. And so we think that they're not spiritual. So we have a lot of, in other words, personality projections on top of what we think is spiritual. And so part of the responsibility of being a vessel is that each day we study and contemplate the meaning of the scriptures vis-a-vis our personality and our life. Am I living the scriptures the way I understand them to be? Like in AA they say, I follow God the best I understand God to be. So each of us in our kind of growing, expanding realization in this life, our life path, each day have that responsibility to study a scripture deeply, and deeply enough so that we self-reflect, because true self-study is not without self-reflection and self-honesty. And through the self-honesty and the self-reflection comes true discrimination. Because discrimination is always you're contemplating the real. You're contemplating your real value and now how everything has value by virtue of being an extension of the Godhead. And how everything has value, and then we contemplate our sort of personality, human relationship to that. So almost all traditions have this emphasis on self-study and gaining discrimination through the scriptures. And the Native Americans have that very much as part of that, what they do too. If you read any of these descriptions of what a true Pueblo man is no different than a true Christian man. Selfless, non-self-aggrandizing, serving the community, not thinking of what he's getting for what he's giving. And they even go on to elaborate personality traits like being able to be humorous and lighthearted so that people don't feel too heavy around you. And one of the great gifts of the Native American is this clown, and which I so appreciate, because we need to do that. We're always like enjoying cutting up and being ridiculous and making fun of ourselves, because the function of the clown in the Native American is to disperse the affectation and the conceit and also the kind of low self-esteem. So in a way, the clown is like the universal dissolver. It's a little bit like Shiva. It has that function. And what the clowns do in the Native American ritual is they usually come in first or early on, and they make fun of the Kachinas and the deities, and they make fun of all of the holy people in the village and any outsiders, and they absolutely make fun of everybody, and they make fun of the human condition. They can get sort of profane in some of their jokes, and they used to throw urine on everybody, which actually in India is a very holy thing because it's a great disinfectant, but we think, ooh, our Puritan upbringing from, the Calvinist tradition. Ew.
Church lady. How unsavory.
So the Indians don't have that problem. They understand all of human life, and being close to human life helps. When you have to birth the baby right in your house, and then you have to bury the grandmother or whatever, you have to be close to all of it. So, and all of these traditions, the Native American and the Kabbalistic and the Taoist and the Buddhists have this sense of the sacredness of the balance and of the middle. Not the middle like Sean was talking about, the poor guy that got halfway between heaven and earth, but the middle, this body here is really the tree of life, the Kabbalist tree of life with all its sephira, and I won't get into too much of that right now, but the body is the tree of life. And that is the field of action, that is the sacred circle, and that is what we carry with us everywhere we go. So of course that would be the first responsibility as a human being, to know how to revere and take care of the body and have this moderate approach. And so some of our dismay when we encounter teachers who spout a lot of good words, but they don't live it. They don't walk their talk. Or sometimes they may look like they're walking their talk, and then behind closed doors they're not walking their talk. So let me talk a little bit more about ceremony for a moment. Partly because I've gotten interested in it again, and it's so strange to me. Most ceremony used to leave me pretty cold. I can say, in most of the churches, I remember living in Rome and going into the Vatican and all these other places, and it just seemed it didn't seem connected to human life, and then when I went to some of the Native American things, and it didn't seem connected, or then I started hearing some of the horror stories about Native American medicine men who supposedly are so holy, and people come to them with so much trust and faith, and then they manipulate them for their own self-aggrandizement and getting power. Because people get a lot of power when they have followers. That's why I really love that Indian prayer, may your authority return to you. But what happens so often is people find a teacher and they give up their self, their sense of self. And maybe that comes from partly their problems with self-esteem, so they hope a little bit of that shine will rub off on them, or whatever the issue is. Or maybe it's just a sense of security. If you follow somebody, you have a sense of security. And that's not to say that teachers and gurus aren't essentially important. They hold a role in all our cultures from the beginning of time. The 7 rishis in India and all the great saints. If we didn't have them, I don't think we'd know where to turn. But so often people are just faking it. And how do we know when somebody's faking it? If they don't have that innocent, spontaneous mind. If it doesn't come out of the depths of their heart and their being. And some people are good actors. So the Indian ceremonies are based on this acknowledgement that all of life is really alive, including inanimate things like mountains and rocks. And they also have this sense of the mountain around which everything is moving. So there's this sense of the still point and the still center of everything, which is that acknowledgement of the absolute. That is the acknowledgement of the absolute without attributes, the still point of silence without attributes. So you can say that's sort of the reference point. So there's the mountain around which everything is moving, and generally it's associated with the heights or the heavens. You can say above man, or all the astral, the energy levels, and all of the limitless light and the levels of beyond comprehension. That's around which everything moves. That is the great height. That's the absolute. So there's an acknowledgement of the absolute. And in the metaphor of the human being, it's above the head. And in the metaphor of the ceremonial life of the Indians, it's the mountains. It's the highest point that you can conceive, and beyond that even, where the kachinas and the great devatas and beings reside. And so in Tibetan Buddhism and Native American ceremonies, there usually this appreciation of all the four directions. So in Zuleika dances, she always does homage to all the directions, the zenith and the nadir, and east, south, west, and north. All traditions have that acknowledgement, which of course is completely inside this vehicle of the body. And when we relate to space on the physical plane, we relate to the east because that's where the sun. So there's the sense of the highest point in the mountains, the heavens, and the sun, Father. Son, Father, Father, Son. And then Father, Son brings forth the life from Mother Earth. And Mother Earth is, of course, where we have our feet planted. And so the human being is this mysterious being in between heaven and the lowest point, which is actually, you can say, the points of evil. So we are sort of the intermediator between all of these planes of existence. And so all of the ancient traditions around the world have some acknowledgement that there are levels of yuck underneath. That if you go farther away from the limitless, then you get to the very limited and constricted. And so a divine spark can kind of fall and tumble and get more enmeshed, too. And then along comes human being, who maybe sees the divine spark of their cousin becoming encrusted with demonic energy and consciousness. You know, we've had this experience in our lives where people that we care about get encrusted and caught up in a world of shells and darkness and incrustation and limited consciousness. And yet all over the world, the Greeks and all the Peruvians, everybody's talking about the Absolute being always expanding light. And so when a divine spark is encrusted in all this matter and limited shells, then human being comes along to redeem and restore and reconcile the polarities that are actually built into our very nature. So our very nature the Indians say man is made from everything. Man is made from everything. We're made from the matter and the consciousness and the beyond, and we're also made of the most limited and most demonic consciousness there is. That we're all those things. But we're not here to get just caught up, which seems to be the majority of the human condition at the moment, getting caught up. But once there's that impulse to harmony and balance, which is going towards that center, that sacred middle. There's that recognition that we want to live because we want to be happy. We all human beings have that desire, that great longing to be home. I want to go home. I want to be happy. I want to be fulfilled. Or I want to be me. Even just I want to be me is an expression of I want to be whole, I want to be myself. So in this kind of myriad teeming confusion that we're in, along comes the gift of sacred life, sacred space, sacred ceremony. And we can get this gift from all of these ancient cultures. And one of the nice things about the Tewa is that they say that each human being who becomes more fully made, which is more integrated in terms of their polarities, and more a full human being. Each full human being in the Pueblo culture then participates in evolving new understandings in their own religion. So as we balance the polarities of our nature, the demonic and the divine, and as we balance the pull of matter and the pull of heaven, as we acknowledge all of these things and begin to balance up and down and right and left, then there's that responsibility to then share the source of the happiness. And happiness comes through harmony and beauty. So most Native American traditions talk about harmony and beauty. An expression of beauty being a grace of God and a redemption of those sparks. So it's beautiful just to even think of these things. You know, to think that we have this responsibility, but it's a responsibility to make a beautiful garden of our lives and to be a gift to others and to express the depths and heights of the glory of the Creator. And so when a person is actually doing ritual, what are they doing? Or what should they be doing? That's what we're doing. We're invoking, we're redeeming, and we're balancing and harmonizing. And we're balancing and harmonizing all of this. And so the actual structure of the way these ceremonies are put together acknowledges Father, Son, Mother, Earth, and acknowledges evil and good, and acknowledges the role of a human being to bring forth beauty and harmony. And then the other wonderful thing that the Native Americans really, really understand that I think Western culture has lost, except for the acknowledgement of Jesus Christ as a sacrificial lamb. Sacrifice and sacred are the same root word. So when the Native Americans get prepared to do any kind of a ritual, and when Zuleika gets prepared to dance and Andrea gets prepared to dance, when anybody who really is serious about expressing the sacred, they go through a sacrificial act of releasing negativity, cleansing themselves. And so the first sacrifice is the cleansing. And from the cleansing comes the sacrifice of time and space in your life that you devote to this sacred act. That is your sacrifice. So every time we sit and meditate or chant or pray or sing, we're sacrificing loafing around on the couch watching TV. So the very movement of energy coming forth from our beings is a sacrifice of something. So there's this acknowledgement that for man to invoke and bring in the beauty and the holiness is the necessity of man himself and her woman herself, human, to sacrifice something in order to invoke the greater energy. And so this vehicle of the human being and the vehicle of sacred space and sacred culture, it allows for this to happen so that when the Indians are singing and dancing on the earth, every beat of the feet is a prayer. And that is to wake the earth up and bring forth her bounty and blessings and beauty. And human beings are giving to the earth through their feet and prayers. So everything becomes a rapturous, kind of unrelentingly persistent invocation of nature and the divine. To draw forth the life from the seed and to draw down the rain. So when there's the drum beat goes deep into the subconscious as the pulsation, which is of course this throb in ourselves that Sean says is very much on this pubic plateau. And the Kabbalists talk about the pubic area as being the vital soul, where basically the astral energy is reflected, and it's like your sort of storehouse. It's sort of where your kundalini can begin to come up and move through you. So this whole kind of act of being a human being has to do with this invocation It's like drawing up the kundalini from the root to consummate with the divine. So you see how all of this imagery is very erotic. And what have we done with eroticism in our culture? But we basically turned people into pictures and objects. And what everybody's running after is really this to happen. What we are really deeply longing for is this bliss of union. So all of these acts of humankind contribute to that. Our responsibility in sort of every act of our life, and that's some of the beauty of the Native Americans, that we get that from them. That every act we take is an invocation and a sacrifice. And of course, you can't be thinking about that all the time when you're cutting potatoes, but if it happens to cross your mind, it's a good thing. So all of these words, the Kabbalists bring us these words that the Indians have, and the Tibetans have, and the Buddhists have, and the Chinese have, about the harmony, the way of harmony. And the way of harmony is in this dynamic flux of life. So in the Chinese, the yin and the yang is always kind of pulsating, right? There's this pulsating. There's this energy flowing between Mother Earth and Father Sun, Father Sky. So there's this pulsating rhythm. And in the middle of that, in the Chinese, is the Tao. That center. The center, the mountain around which the moving is done, and the still point that T.S. Eliot talks about. That's where the real composure comes. And that center is without attributes and without alternation. So Shan has this beautiful mantra that I just adore. And I won't do the Sanskrit for you right now, but this is the translation. I bow to the Supreme, whose exterior form is nirvana, whose exterior form is union, right? So that's like the 10 fingers beyond idea. The exterior form of the Supreme is the union with itself. I bow to the Supreme Ruler of our world, who manifests on the physical plane as the sun. And so every culture around the world worships the sun in some way. The Son of God. In the Kabbalists, the sun is the bright, blazing heart. Sometimes they say it's the solar plexus and sometimes the heart. So, there's this little controversy about roving chakras. Nobody's quite sure where chakras are, but the sun is very often presented as the heart and soul, and the Son of God, the child of God, the Son, which is also related to the absolute Son, right? So that our Son is a symbol of the absolute light, limitless light coming into our life. Who manifests on the physical plane as the Son, who expands in the Scriptures as all consciousness and knowledge, who expands in the Scriptures as all consciousness knowledge, who is unborn, does not age, is without qualities, who doesn't worry how his hair looks that day, who is absolute direct knowledge of the eternal, who dwells in the eternal. I worship thee, who is without the alternation of opposite states. Alternation of opposite states. But all the sacred ritual all around the world, the drum beat and the pulsation and the throb, that's alternation. So in the absolute is without qualities, without categories, without principles, you can say, but who owns them all. And then the beginning of manifestation is alternation and vibration and sound. And within that is the still point and the silence and our place of composure. So when the Chinese say that when you offer the sacrificial spoon of the water, you do it from that place. So essentially our sacrificing has to do with cleansing so that we abide in that supreme place of silence and goodness. And then from there, really, there is just an outpouring of goodness to others. And we can be happy and live in happiness and give happiness, and because that resonates with every other person's divine center and silence and spark. So that's why so many saints look like our friends. You know. It's just a quotation of Krishna. Krishna talking to Arjuna, his dear devotee. One of the things that they've said about Krishna is that it's the personal inner experience of the divine. So it's the beloved, the Christ, Krishna, same root, is our own personally experienced and universal beloved. And so each one of us can have that union with that it's built into our whole structure of our being. Krishna says to Arjuna, selfish desire is found in the senses, mind, and intellect, misleading them and burying the understanding in delusion. Fight with all your strength, Arjuna, controlling your senses. Conquer your enemy, the destroyer of knowledge and realization. And to me, this is an expression of what sacrificial spirituality is. And ritual and ceremony can help remind us of what we need to be doing all the time, which is seeing how that selfish desire, which is separation from each other, and thinking that we're separate rather than that we're a community of human beings in a community of universal life. That separatist tendency is what gives birth to that sense of desire of having to possess another person or Maserati or whatever it is. So it's not the senses and the mind and the intellect that are really the problem. Those are vehicles that we are given to function in the world. That's not the problem. It's the selfish desire that kind of creeps in and attaches itself. It's like a virus taking over the apparatus. So selfish desire creeps in, and somebody may have a beautiful mystical experience, right? And through the inner senses of you can say the astral realization, they'll have visions and gorgeous interdimensional experiences. But what happens when the selfish desire creeps in and wants to take hold of that and aggrandize itself, the ego and the body? Then it becomes a calling card and a business card. And so when somebody becomes famous, you know, our hearts should go out to them, really, because they have a really hard job to do to keep that selfish desire and that ego from actually destroying the goodness that they received and the goodness that they're able to give another person.